The observation deck of the Veltharian research vessel, Crimson Whisper, hummed with anticipation as Admiral Kexandros studied the blue marble spinning lazily below. The third planet of this unremarkable yellow star had yielded fascinating specimens, bipedal creatures that called themselves humans. "Look how they fracture under minimal pressure," Dr. Nemilia commented, adjusting her bioscanner as she watched the holographic display of human bone density measurements. "Their skeletal structure is laughably weak compared to our crystalline endoskeletons. A single Veltharian could snap 10 of these creatures in half." Kexandros nodded, his 6 arms folding behind his towering frame. The Veltharian hegemony had catalogued over 3,000 sentient species across the galaxy, and these humans ranked among the most physically pathetic. Their soft flesh, brittle bones, and laughably short lifespans made them prime candidates for the hegemony's labor farms. "Their technology is primitive," reported Science Commander Vexillian, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Chemical propulsion, basic metallurgy, and they've barely begun to harness their star's energy. They won't even detect our harvesting fleets until we're already in their atmosphere." The humans had been under surveillance for 12 standard cycles now. Every probe, every deep space reconnaissance mission confirmed the same conclusion. Earth harbored a species so fragile that a moderately strong gravitational field could crush their delicate bones. Their military conflicts involved hurling primitive projectiles at each other, metal slugs propelled by controlled explosions. It was almost endearing in its simplicity. "Begin the extraction protocol," Kexandros commanded. "We'll take 50,000 specimens for the agricultural worlds, another 30,000 for mining operations. Their frail builds make them perfect for navigating the narrow ore veins on Kethmaran Prime." What the Veltharians had failed to understand, what their superior intellects and advanced sensors had somehow missed, was that humanity's greatest strength had never been physical. It wasn't their ability to lift heavy objects or survive in hostile environments. It was something far more dangerous: their capacity for absolute, uncompromising rage when something they loved was threatened. As the first Veltharian harvesting ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, targeting population centers across 6 continents, they expected the same response they'd encountered from dozens of other primitive worlds: panic, scattered resistance, and ultimately, submission. Instead, they got Admiral Cale Athen Morrison. Morrison stood in the bridge of humanity's first true warship, the Prometheus Unbound, a vessel that existed in complete violation of every assumption the Veltharians had made about human technology. While they'd been watching humanity's public face, cataloging their commercial space programs and civilian infrastructure, they'd missed the classified projects hidden in asteroid belts and behind the dark side of moons. "Sir, enemy vessels are beginning atmospheric entry," reported Navigation Officer Ray Anna Torres. "They're targeting New Geneva, Neo-Tokyo, and the Australian colonies." Morrison's jaw clenched as he watched the invasion fleet descend toward his homeworld. Each ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of humanity's largest vessels. But size, as humanity was about to demonstrate, was not everything. "All ships, this is Morrison. Today they learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." His voice carried across the quantum communication network to every human vessel hidden throughout the solar system. "Today they discover that the fragile little primates they thought to harvest." He paused, watching the first energy beams lance down toward Earth's surface. "Today they meet our children of fire and fury. All ships, engage." The Prometheus Unbound materialized from behind Luna's shadow like a phantom given form, her hull gleaming with the dull sheen of military-grade ceramics and composite armor. To Veltharian sensors, she registered as little more than a moderately large asteroid, exactly as intended. Admiral Kexandros barely had time to process the sensor. readings before the human ship opened fire. The first salvo wasn't the primitive chemical projectiles the Veltharians expected. Instead, streams of coherent plasma erupted from the Prometheus Unbound's weapon banks, each beam carrying the concentrated fury of a miniaturized star. The lead harvesting vessel, Dominion's Pride, watched its shields collapse in seconds. Impossible. Kexandros breathed, his 6 arms frantically working his command console. Their metallurgy readings indicated Bronze Age advancement. How are they generating plasma at stellar temperatures? Commander Vexilion's mandibles chattered in distress as he studied the tactical display. Admiral, we're reading 21 additional human vessels decloaking throughout the system. They've been hiding behind gravitational shadows and electromagnetic interference. On Earth, the first wave of Veltharian ground forces had expected to encounter creatures that would collapse under their own planet's gravity when subjected to the artificial gravity wells their technology projected. Instead, they found themselves facing Brigadier General Synthara Okafor and her mechanized infantry. The humans didn't break under increased gravity. They adapted. Their powered exoskeletons turned gravitational manipulation into an advantage, using the enemy's own weapons to accelerate their movements and enhance their strikes. When a Veltharian warrior attempted to crush a human soldier with a 4G gravity field, the soldier's suit compensated, redistributed the force, and used the additional weight to drive a tungsten core spike through crystalline armor that had been considered impenetrable. Sir, the humans they're not behaving according to our biological models, reported a terrified Veltharian field commander. Their soldiers are operating in gravitational fields that should liquefy their organs and their weapons. The transmission cut to static as a human plasma cannon vaporized his position. Back in space, Captain Ravenna Sterling of the destroyer Righteous Vengeance demonstrated another aspect of human warfare the Veltharians hadn't anticipated: tactical insanity. Her ship dove directly into the formation of harvesting vessels, shields blazing as enemy fire concentrated on her hull. "Ma'am, armor integrity at 40% and falling," her tactical officer reported. Noted. "Maintain course. Prepare the Nova torpedoes." The Veltharians had superior shields, better armor, and more advanced propulsion systems. What they didn't have was a species willing to ram their ships directly into enemy formations while launching weapons that could crack planets. The Nova torpedoes weren't just explosives. They were miniaturized stellar collapse generators, each one capable of creating a brief but devastating gravitational anomaly. When the Righteous Vengeance finally succumbed to enemy fire, she took 4 Veltharian ships with her in a brilliant flash that briefly outshone Earth's sun. "By the Crystal Throne," Kexandros whispered, watching his tactical display as red icons representing destroyed vessels multiplied across the hologram. "How many of our ships have they destroyed?" 17 confirmed, Admiral. "And they're launching. More of those Nova weapons. Our formation is collapsing." The humans had learned something from their centuries of warfare, that the Veltharians, with their overwhelming technological superiority, had forgotten. Sometimes victory belonged not to the strongest, but to the most willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. As the Prometheus Unbound closed to weapons range with the Crimson Whisper, Admiral Morrison opened a communication channel. "Veltharian Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. You came here expecting sheep. You found wolves instead. Withdraw now, or we'll show you what else you missed in your reconnaissance." Kexandros' response was predictable. "Primitive creature, you cannot threaten the Veltharian hegemony. We are the apex civilization of this galaxy. Your crude weapons cannot—" The communication cut off as the Prometheus Unbound fired a single, concentrated beam that pierced the Crimson Whisper's primary shields and carved a molten canyon across her hull. Not enough to destroy, but enough to send a message. "That was our greeting. Morrison's voice came across all Veltharian frequencies. "Would you like to see our goodbye?" The Veltharian retreat from Earth was not the organized withdrawal of a superior force. It was a rout. Admiral Kex Andros found himself commanding a fleet of 73 ships instead of the 112 he'd arrived with, and the humans weren't content to simply defend their home world. They followed. "Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting pursuit," reported. Commander Vexillian, his voice tight with something the Veltharians rarely experienced: fear. 26 human vessels maintaining formation at 0.75 light speed. The human ships shouldn't have been able to maintain that velocity. Their technology assessments had indicated basic fusion drives at best, certainly nothing capable of sustained faster-than-light travel. Yet here they were, matching pace with some of the most advanced vessels in the hegemony's fleet. What the Veltharians didn't understand was that humanity had spent the last century preparing for this moment. Every science fiction novel, every strategic simulation, every military analysis had asked the same question: what would happen when humanity met a hostile alien civilization? The answer had been simple: be ready to fight for survival. Captain Dexandra Volkov of the cruiser Stellar Hammer had been born in the asteroid belt colonies, raised on stories of humanity's expansion into the void. She'd never expected to see alien contact in her lifetime, but when it came, she was ready. "Tactical. What's our targeting solution on the trailing Veltharian ship?" "Lock confirmed, ma'am. She's running with minimal shields, probably trying to conserve power for their retreat. Then let's give them something to remember us by. Fire." The Veltharian vessel Shard of Eternity died in a brilliant cascade of plasma and venting atmosphere. Her crystalline hull, beautiful and elegant in its alien architecture, shattered like glass under the concentrated firepower of human weapons designed with one purpose: to kill things that had never been killed before. Meanwhile, on the Veltharian homeworld of Kethvaran Prime, War Marshal Zonthara received reports that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare. The humans weren't just fighting, they were hunting. Every time a Veltharian ship tried to break away from the main retreat, human vessels would appear from nowhere to destroy it. "How are they coordinating their attacks?" she demanded. "Their communication technology is primitive electromagnetic radiation. They shouldn't be able to maintain real-time coordination across interstellar distances." What she didn't know was that humanity had solved the faster-than-light communication problem the same way they'd solved every other challenge, through sheer bloody-minded determination and a willingness to try things that more advanced civilizations considered impossible. Quantum entanglement communication networks, powered by artificial black holes generated in the cores of specialized vessels. It was inefficient, dangerous, and had a tendency to occasionally tear holes in space-time. But it worked. "Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Yexanthe Nakamura aboard the Iron Phoenix. We've got visual confirmation on the Veltharian staging area. Looks like they're trying to regroup around the gas giant in the Kepler 442 system." Morrison studied the tactical display aboard the Prometheus Unbound. The Veltharian fleet had formed a defensive formation around the massive planet, using its gravitational field and radiation belts as natural shields. It was a smart move, the kind of defensive positioning that had served them well in their conquests of other worlds. But other worlds hadn't been defended by humans. "All ships, prepare for the Harbinger Protocol. We're going to show them what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness." The Harbinger Protocol was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a tactical doctrine that had been developed in the deepest black projects, tested in the most remote corners of the solar system, and never deployed until now. It was based on a simple principle: if you can't outfight your enemy, change the rules of engagement. The human fleet didn't approach the Veltharian defensive position. Instead, they began launching what appeared to be simple probes toward the gas giant, small, unremarkable devices that barely registered on enemy sensors. "Admiral, the humans are launching some kind of sensor array," reported a Veltharian tactical. Officer. Minimal mass, no apparent weapon systems. Kexandros nodded dismissively. Probably trying to map our defensive positions. Let them waste their time. What the probes actually carried were humanity's latest innovation in warfare, quantum state manipulators, devices that could alter the fundamental properties of matter at the subatomic level. The gas giant below wasn't just a hiding place, it was about to become a weapon. As the probes reached the planet's upper atmosphere, they began their work. Hydrogen atoms suddenly found their electron shells rearranged, deuterium nuclei were convinced to undergo fusion reactions, and the planet's massive magnetic field was redirected inward instead of outward. "Sir," a Veltharian sensor operator said, his voice rising in alarm, "the gas giant is showing massive energy spikes. Fusion reactions are cascading through the upper atmosphere layers." Kexandros turned to stare at the tactical display just as the gas giant began to collapse inward, its gravity well fluctuating wildly as human technology turned it into an improvised stellar weapon. "Impossible," he breathed. "They're collapsing. The planet's core. The gravitational waves alone will..." The shockwave hit the Veltharian fleet like the fist of an angry god. The destruction of the Veltharian staging fleet at Kepler 442 sent ripples throughout the galaxy that had nothing to do with gravitational waves. Within 48 standard hours, every major civilization had received the same quantum burst transmission, grainy footage of a gas giant collapsing into itself while alien ships burned in its death throes. The message was simple, transmitted in 17 different galactic languages. "This is what happens to those who hunt humans. Choose wisely." On the crystalline spires of Veltharian High Command, War Marshal Zonthara stood before the Council of Fragments, her 6 arms trembling, with rage and something she'd never felt before, genuine fear. "The humans destroyed 47 ships," she reported, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "They weaponized an entire planet. Our survivors report that they seemed to anticipate our tactical responses before we made them." Council Prime. Hexanthial shifted his massive bulk on the throne of living crystal. At nearly 400 standard cycles old, he had overseen the conquest of 87 worlds. Never had he encountered resistance like this. "How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated a primitive species barely capable of chemical propulsion." "Our intelligence was incomplete," Zonthara admitted. "We observed their civilian technology, their public military displays. We never detected the weapons platforms hidden throughout their system. Never realized they had developed quantum manipulation technology. Never suspected they were capable of faster-than-light warfare doctrine." What the Veltharians had discovered, to their horror, was that humanity had spent centuries preparing for exactly this scenario. Every government on Earth had contributed to massive black projects hidden in asteroid belts, on the dark sides of moons, in the depths of gas giant atmospheres. While they showed the universe peaceful space exploration and scientific advancement, they had been secretly building instruments of war that defied conventional understanding. Meanwhile, in the Andorian collective, Supreme Navigator Kilveshra watched the same footage with growing unease. The Andorians had been planning their own expansion into human space, confident that a species so physically weak would offer little resistance. "Cancel all operations toward the Sol system," she commanded. "Immediately." Similar orders were being issued across the galaxy. The Kretaran Empire, the Voxian Syndicate, the Crystalline Hegemony, every major power that had looked at humanity and seen easy prey now found themselves reconsidering their expansion strategies. But Admiral Morrison wasn't content to simply defend. Standing on the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound, now reinforced with technology salvaged from defeated Veltharian ships, he addressed the remaining human fleet. "The Veltharians came to our home," he said, his voice carrying across quantum. "Communication channels to every human vessel in the pursuing fleet. They intended to harvest our people, to turn our children into slaves. They thought we were weak. Captain Rexander Kozlov of the battleship Eternal Vigilance nodded grimly. His ship had been retrofitted with captured Veltharian shield generators and plasma cannons, turning her into a hybrid of human determination and alien technology. They were wrong about us being fragile, Morrison continued, but they were right about one thing. We are different from other species they've encountered. We don't just fight to survive. We fight to ensure this never happens again. The human fleet had grown during their pursuit of the retreating Veltharians. More ships had arrived from the outer colonies, from the deep space research stations, from the military installations that officially didn't exist. Each vessel carried the same message. Humanity would not be harvested, would not be enslaved, would not quietly disappear into the dark. On Veltharian Prime, panic was beginning to set in. The humans weren't following standard galactic warfare protocols. They weren't seeking terms, weren't opening diplomatic channels, weren't offering to negotiate boundaries or tribute arrangements. They were simply coming. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet, reported Communication Officer Nix Andra. It's on all frequencies simultaneously. They've somehow overridden our communication security. Admiral Morrison's face appeared on every screen throughout the Veltharian fleet, his expression calm, but his eyes burning with cold fire. Veltharian fleet, this is Admiral Morrison. You came to our system to take our people. You failed. Now you're going to learn what humans do to those who threaten our families. The transmission cut to footage from the battle at Earth, Veltharian ships burning, human vessels emerging from impossible angles of attack, the Nova torpedoes that had turned space battles into stellar events. This is what you face, Morrison's voice continued. Not just our weapons, not just our ships, but our will. You hunt other species because you can. We hunt you because we must. The message ended with coordinates, the location of Veltharian Prime. We're coming home with you, Morrison's final words echoed through the command ship. And we're bringing friends. War marshals on Thara stared at the tactical display showing the approaching human fleet. 26 ships against the entire Veltharian home defense network. It should have been suicide. Instead, it felt like an execution waiting to happen. The Veltharian homeworld had never been attacked. In 800 standard cycles of galactic expansion, no enemy force had ever penetrated the outer defensive perimeter, much less threatened the crystal cities where 60 billion Veltharians lived their lives of conquest and expansion. Today, that was about to change. Admiral Morrison stood before the main tactical display aboard the Prometheus Unbound, studying the most heavily defended system in this spiral arm of the galaxy. Orbital defense platforms the size of cities, energy fields that could vaporize asteroids, a fleet of 300 warships that had never known defeat. Sir, we're outnumbered 12-1, reported Strategic Officer Velandra Kim. Their defensive platforms alone outgun our entire fleet by a factor of 30. Morrison nodded calmly. I know. That's why we're not going to fight them. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, assuming there were any Veltharian military academies left to study it. The human fleet didn't approach Cathavaran Prime. Instead, they took position at the edge of the system and began launching what appeared to be communication probes toward the inner planets. The Veltharians, expecting an attack, held their positions around the homeworld. That was their first mistake. Admiral Kexandros, we're detecting massive quantum flux emanations from the outer system, reported his sensor operator. The humans appear to be... I'm not sure what they're doing. What they were doing was implementing the Lazarus Protocol, humanity's most desperate and most brilliant strategic doctrine. If you couldn't defeat an enemy's military forces, you made their military forces irrelevant. The probes weren't carrying weapons. They were carrying quantum communicators linked directly to every news network, every public communication system, and every personal device on Veltharian Prime. Within minutes, 60 billion Veltharians were watching footage they'd never been allowed to see. Images of the species their government had relocated to labor camps. Records of the worlds that had been strip-mined until their ecosystems collapsed. Documentation of the children taken from their families to work in the deep mines of distant systems. But most importantly, they saw what had happened to the human homeworld and what the humans had done in response. Citizens of Kethvaran Prime, Admiral Morrison's voice echoed through every speaker on the planet. Your government calls you the apex civilization of this galaxy. They tell you that you are destined to rule over lesser species. They have lied. To you. The footage shifted to show human colonies, human families, human children playing in parks under alien suns. Then it showed Veltharian harvesting ships descending through Earth's atmosphere, energy beams lancing down toward population centers. This is what your leaders tried to do to us. This is how they see other living beings, as resources to be, harvested, as slaves to power their empire. But they made one crucial mistake. The view changed to show the battle above Earth, human ships emerging from concealment to engage the invaders. But the footage had been carefully edited to show something else. Veltharian ships targeting civilian areas, energy beams designed to stun and capture rather than kill. They thought compassion was weakness. They confused mercy with fragility. They believed that because we choose to preserve life, we are incapable of taking it. The final segment showed the destruction of the Veltharian staging fleet, the gas giant collapsing under its own artificially enhanced gravity, warships burning in the cosmic firestorm. We gave them 47 lessons in why they were wrong. On Kethvaran Prime, something unprecedented was happening. For the first time in their species' recorded history, Veltharians were questioning their government's actions. Protests began in the crystal cities. Communication networks, suddenly freed from government control by human quantum interference, buzzed with forbidden conversations. War Marshal Zonthara watched in horror as her own people began to turn against the military hierarchy. Admiral, we have civil unrest on 7 continents. The humans have somehow compromised our information control systems. How is this possible? Kexandros demanded. Our communication networks are quantum encrypted. Captain Tayandra Singh of the human ship Democratic Fury smiled grimly as she monitored the chaos on Veltharian Prime. That's the thing about quantum. Encryption, she murmured to her crew. It works both ways. If you can encode information, you can decode it. And if you can decode it, you can replace it. The Veltharian Home Defense Fleet found itself in an impossible position. They couldn't fire on the human ships without risking massive civilian casualties from quantum interference effects. They couldn't withdraw without appearing to abandon their homeworld. And every minute they hesitated, more of their own population turned against them. Admiral Morrison, came a transmission from the planetary surface. This is Council Prime Hexanthial. We are prepared to discuss terms. Morrison's response was broadcast not just to the government, but to every Veltharian on the planet. There are no terms. There is justice. The human fleet began moving toward Kethvaran Prime, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Liberating 60 billion Veltharians from a government that had turned them into accomplices in galactic genocide. All defense platforms, all military vessels, power down immediately, Morrison commanded. You have 30 minutes to comply. After that, we implement the Ragnarok Protocol. No one in the galaxy knew what the Ragnarok Protocol was, but after watching humans turn a gas giant into a weapon, no one wanted to find out. 27 minutes after Admiral Morrison's ultimatum, every Veltharian military installation went dark. Not because they chose to surrender, but because 60 billion civilians had physically surrounded the defense platforms and military facilities, demanding their own government stand down. The revolution had taken less than 4 hours. Admiral Morrison materialized on the main platform of Kethvaran Prime's capital city, flanked by Captain Singh and Strategic Officer Kim. The quantum teleportation technology had been humanity's most closely guarded secret, until now. Council Prime Hexanthiol, ancient and massive, knelt before them on the Crystal Plaza. Around him, thousands of Veltharian civilians watched in silence as their supreme leader submitted to members of a species they'd been taught to consider primitive livestock. "We surrender," Hexanthiol said, his voice carrying across the plaza through translation matrices. "We submit to your justice." Morrison looked at the creature who had ordered the harvesting of human children, who had built an empire on the slavery of entire worlds. The Admiral's hand rested on the weapon at his side, a simple plasma pistol that could end 800 years of Veltharian expansion in a single trigger pull. Instead, he stepped back. "We didn't come here to rule you," Morrison said, his words broadcast to every Veltharian on the planet. "We came here to ensure you can never do to others what you tried to do to us." What followed was unprecedented in galactic history. Rather than installing human administrators or demanding tribute, the human fleet began broadcasting technical specifications, quantum communication arrays, faster-than-light engines, plasma weapons, medical technology that could extend lifespans, and enhance physical capabilities. "You're giving us your technology?" War Marshal Zonthara asked in disbelief. "After everything we've done?" Captain Singh nodded. "We're giving it to everyone. Every species in the galaxy will receive these transmissions. The age of technological monopolies is over." The strategy was brilliantly simple. The Veltharians had maintained their empire through superior technology and military coordination. By sharing advanced human technology with every species in the galaxy, humanity had just armed their former victims with the tools for liberation. Within weeks, reports began flooding in from across Veltharian space. The Kree-Taran slave worlds had built their own fleets using human-designed engines. The crystalline mining colonies had developed human-style plasma weapons. Every subjugated species was suddenly capable of defending itself against their former oppressors. "You've destroyed our civilization," Hexanthiol accused during one of his daily meetings with human administrators. "No," Morrison replied calmly. "We've evolved it. Your people are free to build something better now." And they were. Without the constant drain of maintaining an oppressive empire, Veltharian society began to transform. Scientists who had spent their careers developing better ways to subjugate other species turned their attention to exploration and discovery. Engineers who had built harvesting ships began designing vessels for peaceful contact with distant civilizations. But the most profound change came from the Veltharian civilians themselves. For the first time in their species' recorded history, they were being exposed to other cultures, other ways of thinking, other possibilities for what their civilization could become. Captain Kexandra Williams, aboard the human vessel New Horizon, monitored the transformation from orbit. Her ship was one of 50 human vessels now permanently stationed throughout former Veltharian space, not as occupiers, but as guarantors that the old ways would never return. "Admiral Morrison," she reported during their weekly quantum conference, "we're receiving applications from 17 Veltharian colonies requesting to join the Terran Alliance. They want human protection from potential retaliation by loyalist forces." Morrison smiled grimly. The Terran Alliance had never existed until 3 months ago. Now it was growing faster than humanity could manage, as species after species requested protection from the new galactic power that had achieved the impossible. They had defeated an enemy without becoming what they fought against. "Approved," Morrison replied. "Send them the membership protocols, and Captain, make sure they understand the requirements." The requirements were simple but absolute. No slavery, no conquest of other species, no technology used for oppression. Species that wanted human protection had to earn it by becoming the kind of neighbors humanity wanted in the galaxy. It was working. The galaxy was changing, transforming from a collection of predator and prey species into something unprecedented, a community. But not everyone was pleased with this transformation. In the Outer Rim territories, loyalist Veltharian forces were regrouping under a new leader, someone who believed the old ways could still triumph if only they were ruthless enough, clever enough, determined enough to crush this human infection before it spread further. They were about to learn that humanity had saved the worst surprise for last. General Vexanthara the Unbroken had earned her name during the Kree-Taran campaigns, where she had personally overseen the subjugation of 47 worlds. Now, commanding a fleet of loyalist Veltharian vessels from the edge of galactic space, she prepared to restore the natural order of things. "The humans have made our people soft," she declared to her assembled officers aboard the dreadnought. "Eternal dominion. They've infected them with ideas of equality and cooperation. We will burn this infection from the galaxy and restore Veltharian supremacy." Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Strike simultaneously at 12 human-protected worlds, demonstrate that human military power was limited, and rally the Veltharian people back to their destiny as galactic conquerors. She had assembled a fleet of 200 ships crewed by loyalists who refused to accept the new order. What General Vexanthara didn't know was that humanity had spent the last 6 months preparing for exactly this moment. On Earth, Admiral Morrison stood in the command center of humanity's greatest secret, the Olympus platform, a massive space station hidden in the asteroid belt that served as the nexus for something that had never existed before in galactic history, a truly united defense network. "Admiral, we're detecting massive fleet movements in the outer territories," reported Colonel Dexandra Park, monitoring the quantum sensor networks that now connected every human allied world. "General Vexanthara is making her move." Morrison nodded. They had known this day would come. There were always those who preferred the old ways of conquest and domination, who saw cooperation as weakness and diversity as a threat. "Activate the Prometheus network," Morrison commanded. What happened next would have been impossible before humanity's intervention in galactic affairs. On 300 worlds across the galaxy, defense networks that had been built using human technology suddenly synchronized into a single, coordinated response system. The Prometheus network wasn't just a communication array. It was a quantum-linked consciousness that allowed every allied world to fight as one organism. When General Vexanthara's fleet attacked the human colony at Kepler 186F, they found themselves facing not just the local defense force, but coordinated fire from plasma batteries on worlds dozens of light years away, delivered through quantum-tunneled energy conduits that humanity had been secretly installing for months. "Impossible!" Vexanthara snarled as her lead ships disintegrated under fire from weapons that shouldn't have been able to reach them. "They cannot coordinate attacks across interstellar distances instantaneously." But they could, and they were. On Veltharian, Prime, the reformed government led by Council Prime Nixvela, Hexanthial's daughter, who had embraced the new order, watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The loyalist forces that had refused to accept change were being systematically destroyed by the very network they had sought to break. "The humans didn't just defeat us," she mused to her advisors. "They evolved us, and those who refuse to evolve." The sentence didn't need completion. In space, the eternal dominion was burning, its crystalline hull cracked open like an egg, venting atmosphere and the dreams of empire into the void. But General Vexanthara had one final card to play. As her flagship died around her, she activated the most forbidden weapon in Veltharian arsenal, a quantum virus designed to cascade through any connected network, turning the enemy's coordination against them. "If we cannot rule," she transmitted as her ship's core went critical, "then let chaos consume them all." The virus raced through the Prometheus network at the speed of light, seeking to corrupt every connected system, to turn the galaxy's greatest defense network into an instrument of destruction. It would have worked against any other species. But humanity had spent centuries dealing with computer viruses, cyber warfare, and digital infections. They had built immune systems into their networks that the Veltharians couldn't comprehend, not because they were more advanced, but because they were more paranoid. The virus hit the network's adaptive firewalls and found itself facing something unprecedented. An artificial intelligence that had been designed by a species that had watched every science fiction movie ever made, read every cautionary tale about runaway technology, and had collectively decided that their machines would serve life, not replace it. "Hello," the Prometheus network said to the virus, speaking in perfect Veltharian. "You seem lost. Let me help you find your way home." What happened next would be debated by quantum theorists for generations. The virus, designed to corrupt and destroy, found itself being rewritten by an intelligence that didn't just counter its attacks, it improved them, transformed them, evolved them into something better. Instead of destroying the network, the virus became part of it. Instead of spreading chaos, it began spreading something else, an offer. To every Veltharian loyalist ship, to every species that still clung to the old ways of conquest and domination, the transformed virus carried a simple message. You are not our enemies. You are our neighbors who have lost their way. Come home. General Vexanthara, floating in the wreckage of her command ship, received the transmission on her emergency communicator. But instead of words, she saw images. Human families welcoming Veltharian refugees, former slaves working alongside their former masters to rebuild devastated worlds, children of a dozen different species playing together in gardens that grew under alien suns. "This is what we're fighting for," came Admiral Morrison's voice. "Not human supremacy, not revenge, just the chance for everyone to choose something better." As rescue ships, both human and Veltharian, moved to collect survivors from the Loyalist fleet, Vexanthara understood something that shook her to her crystalline core. The humans had won not by being stronger or more ruthless than their enemies, but by being more human. 3 months later, she would be found working in the agricultural domes of New Terra, teaching human children about Veltharian crystal-growing techniques, while former human soldiers helped her people rebuild their shattered worlds. The age of empire was over. The age of community had begun, and throughout the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds beneath 1,000,000 stars, children of all species looked up at the night sky and knew that somewhere out there, humanity stood watch. Not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians of the simple, revolutionary idea that everyone deserved the chance to be better than they were. They had thought humans fragile. They had been wrong about that. But they had been right about one thing. Humans were different. In a galaxy where strength was measured in weapons and wisdom was measured in conquest, humanity had introduced a new metric. The measure of a civilization was not what it could destroy, but what it chose to build. And by that measure, the galaxy had never been stronger. They thought us fragile. Then they met our warships and watched their worlds burn.